The telephone, borrowed from the young, kind-eyed nurse, felt like a stone of ice in my trembling hand. Hidden in the corner of the silent, impeccable library of this luxury nursing home, a place my son Javier called the best for you, Mom, I finally heard the voice of my old lawyer, Mr. Rodriguez. His voice, muffled by the bad connection and by decades of trust, was the only bridge I had left to the world I once knew, the world I built with my sweat and the love of my late husband, the Florida. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, bathing the expensive rugs and polished furniture in a golden glow that mocked the darkness settling in my soul. Outside, the perfectly manicured gardens were a silent paradise, but in here, my heart was breaking into a million pieces. "Elena, I'm so sorry to have to tell you this," Mr. Rodriguez said, and his hesitation was already an answer. "Javier, he listed the house for sale last week. The realtor is a partner of his. He is acting as your sole heir, based on the documents that declare him your legal guardian due to your condition." The word condition hung in the air, a cruel and calculated lie my own son had used to lock me in this gilded mausoleum. I looked down at my hands, at the prominent veins that told the story of a life of hard work, of sleepless nights building a small real estate empire brick by brick. The house wasn't just a property, it was the sanctuary of my memories, the place where I raised Javier, where I mourned the death of my husband. And he was selling it, treating my life like a closed-down business, an asset to be liquidated. In that silence, between the smell of lavender from the cleaning products and the distant sound of a lawnmower, the excruciating pain of betrayal gave way to a cold, cutting clarity. A mother's love, that infinite well of forgiveness, had run dry, and in its place, a seed of justice began to sprout. My son wanted the inheritance. He would have it, but not in the way he imagined. In that moment, with the cold phone pressed against my face, I decided that my legacy would not be the trophy of his greed. It would be the weapon of my dignity. If you love Jesus and believe that this story will teach us something, subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes of stories of healing and wisdom. Your subscription is an act of faith in your own transformation. I ask that you join our community of souls who have gone through something similar. For 3 months, my life has been confined to this beige velvet armchair, strategically positioned next to a floor-to-ceiling window. From here, I have a privileged view of the Magnolia Garden, where uniformed men ensure that not a single leaf dares to fall out of place. The Serenity Gardens nursing home, on the outskirts of Miami, is the personification of silent luxury, a place where old age is treated like a contagious disease that must be isolated in sterile, perfumed environments. Everything here is impeccably clean, from the silverware at formal dinners to the polished smiles of the nurses who call me dear without ever looking me in the eye. They glide through the hallways in their soft shoes, administering medicine and loneliness in equal doses. I refuse to wear the silk robes and cashmere shawls that Javier bought and left in my closet. Instead, I wear my old, faded cotton dresses, a silent defiance against this opulence that serves as my cage. I feel like an antique, carefully placed on display, admired for its apparent fragility, but devoid of any function or will. The other residents float like ghosts through these halls, their gazes lost in memories of a time when their voices mattered. We eat at individual tables, the clinking of cutlery being the only dialogue permitted. It is a shared loneliness, the cruelest of all, for we are surrounded by others, yet we are hopelessly alone. I watch the world outside, the cars passing, the young people laughing, and I feel a deep longing not just for my house, but for the woman I used to be. Strong, decisive, the matriarch of a family that I now know was just an illusion. I was the root of the tree, and my son, with a golden axe, cut me down and planted me in this beautiful pot so I would die slowly, far from the earth that nourished me. The humiliation arrived today wearing a $3,000 Italian suit and carrying a bouquet of white lilies, whose sweet fragrance made me nauseous. Javier walked into the common room like an actor taking the stage, his charismatic smile distributed to the nurses and to Mrs. Gable, who was dozing in her wheelchair. He walked over to me, the sound of his expensive shoes echoing on the marble floor, and knelt beside me, taking my hand with a calculated tenderness. "Mom, how are you feeling today? You look radiant," he said, loud enough for the head nurse, Mrs. Davis, to hear from her station. He didn't wait for an answer. Turning to the nurse, he continued, his voice now tinged with a false concern. "She seems a little pale, don't you think, Mrs. Davis? We're adjusting her medication, you know. Sometimes she gets a bit confused. She gets lost in her own little stories." He winked at the nurse, a gesture of complicity that turned me into a senile child, a character in an anecdote told behind my back. I felt the blood rush to my face, a wave of heat and shame that left me speechless. I was the woman who taught him how to tie his shoes, who spent sleepless nights by his side when he had a fever, and now he was painting me as a delusional madwoman to a stranger. He squeezed my hand a little tighter, the smile still on his face, and whispered so only I could hear. "Sign the papers my lawyer will bring tomorrow, Mom. It's just a formality to better manage your finances." The contrast between his public words and his private command was like a slap. He wasn't there to see me. He was there to use me, to intimidate me. And in his gaze, behind the sheen of the perfect sun, I saw the urgency of someone who knows that time is running out. My late husband, Miguel, used to say that we built our dream with Florida dust on our hands and the Caribbean sun in our souls. We arrived in Miami in the 70s with little more than the ambition to give our future son a life we never had. We started with a small house in Hialeah, which we renovated and sold for a modest profit. Miguel was a carpenter with magical hands, and I had a talent for seeing the potential in properties. Everyone else considered lost causes. Together, we were a force. The nights were long, filled with the smell of strong coffee and the sound of our plans being drawn on paper napkins. Every dollar earned was reinvested. Every sacrifice was another brick in the foundation of Javier's future. When he was born, our universe found its center. He was the reason for everything. The best schools, the piano lessons he hated, the Disney vacations that put us in debt for months. Nothing was too much. We wanted him to have the culture, the education, and the security that money could buy, so that he would never feel the fear we felt at the beginning. He grew up a charming and intelligent boy, surrounded by love and privilege, the prince of our small real estate kingdom. I remember Miguel, with his calloused hands, holding Javier's university diploma, with tears in his eyes. "We did it, Elena," he whispered. "Our boy will never have to struggle like we did." Little did we know that the hardest struggle is not for survival, but for maintaining one's character when life becomes too easy. We gave him everything, except the hunger that made us strong. The change in Javier was subtle at first, a cold draft that began to blow after I lost Miguel to an aggressive cancer. The pain of loss united us for a brief period, but soon a new person entered his life and built a wall between us. Tiffany was exactly the kind of woman Miguel and I had feared, status-obsessed, with a porcelain smile and a calculating heart. To her, our story of sacrifice was not a source of pride, but an embarrassing anecdote from a poor past that should be forgotten. She redecorated the house, replacing family photographs with cold, abstract art, and began referring to my opinions as old-fashioned. Javier, blinded by passion and eager to fit into her sophisticated world, began to adopt her language. My Sunday lunches, once a sacred tradition, became an inconvenience in his social schedule. He stopped asking for my advice on business matters, preferring to listen to the experts in Tiffany's circle. Gradually, I went from being the matriarch and advisor to a silent obligation, a living relic of a time he wanted to erase. The warmth of our relationship was replaced by a distant politeness. The visits became shorter, the conversations more superficial. He would look at me with impatience, as if I were a complex problem he didn't have time to solve. Greed is a weed that grows in the shadow of resentment, and I began to see that for Javier, the fortune Miguel and I had built was not a legacy of love, but an obstacle separating him from the life of luxury he and his wife felt they deserved. The first time I felt public humiliation like a hot iron plate on my chest was during a Thanksgiving dinner. Javier and Tiffany had invited their new friends, a group of rich, tanned people who talked about yachts and investments in bored tones. I had spent the entire week preparing the turkey, mole, a recipe from my grandmother that had always been Javier's favorite. When I brought it to the table, proud, Tiffany forced a smile. "Oh, Elena, how rustic. But we've already ordered a roasted turkey from the French bistro. You know, to keep things a bit more elegant." She said it with a cruel lightness, making my dish, filled with love and tradition, seem like something dirty and inappropriate. They put my turkey in the kitchen to be eaten by the staff later. I sat at the table feeling the pitying and embarrassed stares of the other guests. Throughout the entire dinner, I was ignored. Whenever I tried to join the conversation, Tiffany would cut me off with a sharp comment about how times have changed, or Javier would quickly change the subject, as if afraid I would say something to embarrass them. He saw me as a liability, an extra mouth that could tarnish his newly polished image. At one point, I spilled a little water on the Egyptian linen tablecloth, and Tiffany sighed, audibly saying to Javier, "Darling, maybe your mother is tired. I think it's time for her to go to her room." I was dismissed from my own dinner table like a naughty child. Javier didn't say a word to defend me. He just escorted me to my room with a firm grip on my arm and said, "Mom, please, try not to make things difficult." That night, I understood that I was no longer his mother. I was a problem. The final blow came a few months later, in the cold meeting room of a bank in downtown Miami. Javier had convinced me that we needed to consolidate my assets to make them easier to manage. I sat beside him, facing a young bank manager in a suit that looked too expensive for him. As the man spoke in financial jargon I barely understood, Javier interrupted him. "Look, Mr. Peterson, let's be direct," he said, gesturing towards me as if I were an object. "My mother has had a long and productive life, but she's no longer fit to make these decisions. We're talking about a considerable estate that needs active management, not an old lady who can barely remember where she keeps her glasses." He laughed, and the manager smiled uncomfortably. I was frozen in my chair, each of his words a stab wound. "She's a dead weight in the business, a drain on resources that could be better invested. What I need is total control to be able to act quickly in the market." He spoke about me in the third person, right there in front of me, stripping me of my intelligence, my history, and my dignity. He made me sign a stack of documents, saying it was a standard procedure. My hand was shaking so much I could barely hold the pen. I felt small, stupid, powerless. It was that signature that put me here, in this nursing home. They told me it was temporary, a place for me to rest. But the weeks turned into months, and hope turned into despair, until Sophia, the kind-hearted young nurse, handed me a crumpled envelope that had arrived in the mail and that the administration had tried to hide. But in that envelope was a truth that would change everything. With the hands that once cradled my son, I unfolded the letter-headed paper from the law firm Rodriguez and Sons. The letter, dated 6 weeks prior, was the missing piece of the puzzle of my pain. Mr. Rodriguez wrote with a formal care that barely concealed his urgency and alarm. He explained that he had been officially dismissed as the family's lawyer over 4 months ago by a notice signed by Javier, who claimed that my degenerative mental condition required new legal representation, more aligned with the current interests of the estate. My stomach clenched. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a meticulously planned coup. He hadn't just locked me away. He had isolated me, cutting my ties to the one person who could legally defend me. The letter continued, informing me that, out of loyalty to Miguel's memory, he had done a discreet check and discovered that 2 of our most valuable commercial properties had been used as collateral for a high-risk loan to finance a luxury development by one of Javier's partners. He was gambling away our life's work on a risky bet before I was even dead. The fog of sadness and confusion that had enveloped me for months dissipated instantly, replaced by an icy chill of fury and clarity. The woman who cried at the window, the frail old lady he had humiliated, died in that exact moment. In her place, the Elena who had negotiated with tough contractors and faced down city bureaucracy to build her empire, awoke from a long slumber. I was not a victim. I was a queen exiled from her own kingdom, and it was time to reclaim my crown, even if only to melt it down and forge something new. 2 days later, Javier entered my room, this time without flowers, just a leather briefcase and an air of impatience. His partner, the real estate agent, waited in the hallway. "Mom, good morning," he said, with that fake smile I now saw as a thief's mask. "I have some final papers. Here for the sale of the house. A mere formality, as I said. Your signature here and here." He placed the papers and a pen in front of me. I didn't look at the documents. I looked directly into his eyes, and for the first time, he couldn't hold my gaze. I kept my hands folded in my lap. "I'm not signing anything, Javier," I said, my voice calm but as firm as steel. He laughed, a nervous sound. "Mom, let's not start with this. Are you confused again?" "On the contrary," I continued, without blinking. "I was confused when I believed the son I raised still existed. The man in front of me is a stranger, a thief who shares my blood." His smile vanished. "What nonsense are you talking about? Who's been putting ideas in your head?" "The truth," I answered. "The truth about firing Mr. Rodriguez. The truth about my properties being used in your financial gambles. The truth about this luxury prison where you threw me to wait for my death." I stood up, feeling a strength in my legs I hadn't felt in months. "The house you want to sell was made of bricks, but the home I built was made of love. You destroyed the home, Javier, so you don't deserve the bricks." The mask of the devoted son fell away, revealing the ugly face of greed and panic. "You're senile," he hissed, his face red with anger. "You don't know what you're talking about. I'm your guardian. I decide what's best for you and for the business." He took a threatening step forward, and for the first time, I saw not my boy, but a desperate and dangerous man. But I did not back down. Fear had been burned away, leaving only the ashes of determination. "That guardianship," I said, with a tranquility that enraged him further, "was based on lies and on medical reports your money bought. But the truth, my son, is like the sun. It can be covered by clouds for a while, but it always shines again, and your time in the shadows is over." He looked at me with pure hatred, the frustration of a predator whose prey refuses to die. "You'll regret this, you ungrateful old woman. You'll die alone in this place," he shouted, before grabbing his briefcase and slamming the door with a force that made the windows rattle. I heard him yelling at his partner in the hallway. He thought his angry outburst was the final word, a demonstration of his power. He thought he had left me cornered, with nothing. Little did he know that, in the silence of my room, I had already used Sophia's phone to make the call that would seal his fate. Next morning, what I did would leave everyone speechless. "We would like to feel your presence right now. Please write in the comments which city you are watching us from and what time it is there now." By doing this, we create a network of energy and support for this story, a reminder that we are not alone in our battles. Each comment is a point of light in our healing process. The following morning began with Mr. Rodriguez's silent arrival at the nursing home. He was no longer a stranger barred at the reception, but a lawyer with a court order for immediate access. The administration, which had previously treated me like a fragile package, suddenly became nervous and subservient. Within a few hours, I was out of that gilded mausoleum, breathing the humid, free air of Miami. The legal battle that followed was the most difficult of my life, not because of its complexity, but because of the emotional weight of exposing the rot within my own family in a courtroom. Javier and his lawyers painted me as a crazy old woman, presenting forged reports and paid witnesses who spoke of my confusion and paranoia. They tried to demoralize me, to break me on the witness stand. But when it was my turn to speak, I felt no fear. I looked at the judge, a woman with graying hair and a piercing gaze, and I simply told my truth. I did not raise my voice. I just narrated the facts, the sacrifices, Javier's change, the humiliations, the greed, the signing of papers under duress. I presented Mr. Rodriguez's letter, and then I looked at Javier, who was pale and sweating in his expensive suit. "Your Honor, my son's biggest mistake was not wanting my money," I said, my voice choked but firm. It was underestimating my love. He thought a mother's love was synonymous with weakness and forgetfulness. But true love also gives us the strength to protect the dignity and honor we have built. And today, I fight not against him, but for myself. The dignity and clarity of my testimony were more powerful than any forged document. The judge annulled the guardianship, returned full control of my life and assets to me, and ordered a full investigation into Javier's actions. Justice has a curious way of manifesting itself. It is not a bolt of lightning from the sky, but a slow and inexorable erosion that undoes foundations built on lies. The victory in court was just the beginning of the collapse of Javier's world. The judicial investigation into the guardianship fraud and the misuse of my assets scattered his business partners like a gunshot into a flock of pigeons. The luxury real estate project, in which he had gambled all our money, failed spectacularly, leaving him with millions in debt. The scandal spread through his social circle, and the doors that once opened to his charming smile now slammed shut in his face. And Tiffany, his porcelain wife, did not take long to show her true nature. Seeing that the money had dried up and that the family name was now stained with shame, she abandoned him. She filed for divorce and disappeared, taking with her the jewelry and the cars, the only things she ever truly loved. In a few months, Javier lost everything: his wife, his reputation, his opulent house, and the money he tried to steal from me. I felt no joy in learning this, no pleasure of revenge. What I felt was a deep, bitter sorrow for the lost soul of the boy I had raised. He had the chance to inherit a kingdom built with love, but his greed led him to prefer the ruins of a sandcastle. The consequence of his actions was not a punishment I imposed, but a harvest he himself had sown. Back in my house, now legally mine again, the memories hurt. Every corner reminded me of a time that would not return. I could have sold everything, moved to a smaller place, and lived out the rest of my days in quiet comfort. But pain, when it doesn't destroy us, transforms us. And my pain gave me a new purpose. A week after the final sentence, I summoned Mr. Rodriguez and Sophia, the young nurse who had risked her job to help me, for a meeting in my living room. I announced my decision to them. I would liquidate all my assets, all the commercial properties, all the stocks, everything. And with every penny, I would create the Fresh Start Foundation, a safe, dignified, and loving place for elderly people who, like me, had been discarded by their families. A place that would offer not just a roof over their heads, but legal support, therapy, and above all, a community. Place to remind the world that wisdom and experience have no expiration date. And then, I looked at Sophia, whose eyes filled with tears, and I offered her the position of executive director. "I built an empire with bricks and mortar," I told her, "but you reminded me that the true value lies in people. I want you to help me build a legacy made of compassion and dignity." She accepted, and in that moment, the pain of my son's betrayal began to transform into the joy of creating a new and true family. The house of my life, the stage of so many memories, was the first and most symbolic step. Instead of selling it, we transformed it. The walls that had witnessed Javier's lies were now painted in warm, cheerful colors. The dining room where I was humiliated became a common area filled with laughter and card games. My old bedroom now belonged to a gentleman named Roberto, a retired musician who had been left in a hospital by his children. I moved into a small apartment at the back of the property from where I can oversee everything. I am no longer the reclusive owner. I am the oldest resident, the matriarch of this new and unlikely tribe. I supervise the renovations, help in the kitchen, listen to the life stories of the new residents. Every face we welcome is a victory against abandonment. every smile is a balm for my own scars. I traded the loneliness of luxury for the richness of human connection. I lost a son, but I gained dozens of brothers, friends, and confidants. The expensive scent of white lilies has been replaced by the smell of fresh coffee and cornbread. And I realized that the true inheritance that Miguel and I built was not in the numbers in a bank account, but in the resilience of my spirit. Today, I don't have luxury, but I have respect, and that no one can take from me again. 2 years have passed since the day the judge gave me my life back. Time, which used to drag slowly in the stillness of the nursing home, now flies by, filled with the sound of laughter, music, and lively conversations. The Fresh Start Foundation is no longer just my old house. Thanks to careful management and the tireless leadership of Sophia, who has proven to be as brilliant an administrator as she is compassionate, today we have 2 more facilities. One in Tampa, a beautiful house with a view of the bay, and a small complex of assisted living apartments in Orlando, close enough for residents to see their grandchildren more often. The news of our work has spread, and the waiting list is long, a sad testament to how many elderly people are left behind. But it is also a beacon of hope. We receive donations, volunteers of all ages come to help us, and we have created partnerships with law and medical schools to offer the best possible support. I am no longer the central figure of the operation. I am the soul, everyone's grandmother. I spend my days between the 3 facilities, ensuring that the original spirit of the foundation, that of a family, not an institution, remains intact. Sophia takes care of the balance sheets and the bureaucracy, while I take care of the hearts. It is a perfect partnership, forged in the fire of adversity and solidified by mutual respect. We have transformed pain into a movement, a safe haven against the world's indifference. Today, for example, we celebrated the 90th birthday of Mr. Roberto, the musician who was one of our first residents. The garden of our Miami facility, the same garden I used to watch, with empty eyes from my old bedroom window, was full of life. Colorful balloons were tied to the rose bushes, and a jazz band, made up of student volunteers, played old songs that made my companion's eyes sparkle with nostalgia. Roberto, with a party hat askew on his head, conducted the musicians with a cake fork, completely immersed in the joy of the moment. I saw Sophia running after her little son, Miguel, whom she named in honor of my late husband, a gesture that moved me deeply. The smell of the barbecue mingled with the scent of gardenias, and everywhere there was the sound I cherish most, the sound of people who feel at home. I was sitting with a group of ladies, teaching them how to make empanadas, my hands, now stained with flour, moving with the agility of memory. No one here cares about the value of my old properties or the last name we carry. We care about each other's stories, about shared pains, and about the certainty that, no matter what happens out there, in here, no one is alone. This place is living proof that community is the most powerful medicine there is. In the middle of the party, as I watched little Miguel try to catch a butterfly, I felt a chill, as if I were being watched. I looked across the street, beyond the hedge we had planted. There was a man standing there, in the shadow of a fig tree. He was thin, stooped, and wore clothes that looked like they had been worn for many days. His hair was unkempt, and even from a distance, I could see the stubble on his gaunt face. It took a moment for my heart to recognize him. It was Javier. He was no longer the impeccable executive with Italian shoes. He was the ghost of his own ambitions, a human ruin haunting the periphery of the legacy he himself had destroyed. Our eyes met for an instant that seemed to last an eternity. In his gaze, I saw not the hatred or anger from before, but something much worse, a deep, hollow emptiness, the look of a man who has lost not just his fortune, but his soul, felt nothing. Not pity, not anger, not a shred of satisfaction. It was like looking at an old photograph of someone I no longer knew. He looked away first, shrinking as if the sunlight and the joy of our party were too painful for him. Then, he turned and walked away, slowly, until he disappeared around the corner. a stranger in his own story. Seeing Javier did not disturb my peace. On the contrary, it served as a silent endpoint to a chapter I had already closed within myself. Later that night, sitting on the porch of my small apartment, I thought about forgiveness. For a long time, I believed that forgiving him was an obligation, a mother's duty. But now I understand that true forgiveness was not an act of absolving him, but of freeing myself from the power his betrayal had over me. To forgive was to stop waiting for an apology that would never come. It was to accept that the son I loved was long gone, and that mourning him would not bring him back. My legacy would not be defined by the pain he caused me, but by the joy I was building from it. I thought of Miguel, my beloved husband, and I imagined him sitting beside me, holding my hand. I know he would be proud. He wouldn't care about the lost properties or the money spent. He would see the lights on in the big house, hear the echo of laughter, and know that our work, our sweat, our love were not in vain. They were transformed into something infinitely more valuable than any deed or bank account. They became a safe harbor. Tomorrow, a new family will join us. A lady from Fresno, California, whose grandchildren put her on a one-way bus to Florida after selling her house. Her story is painfully familiar. But the difference is that for her, this will not be the end of the line. It will be a fresh start. This is what moves me now. The chance to offer others the hope that was almost taken from me. Yesterday, the granddaughter of one of our residents, a young university student, spent the entire afternoon helping me in the garden. She told me about her dreams of becoming an architect to build affordable housing for the elderly. She said she was inspired by her grandmother's story and by what we have built here. In that moment, I saw it clearly. The good we do does not end with us. It reverberates, creates ripples, inspires the next generation to be kinder, more conscious. The family I lost was of blood, but the family I have built is of purpose. And that bond, I have discovered, is unbreakable. The love I had for Javier was a deep but finite well. The love I feel for this community is an ocean, vast and endless, replenishing itself with each new day, with each new life we touch. At the end of the night, before going to sleep, I stopped in front of the mirror in my bathroom. For months in that nursing home, I avoided my own reflection. I saw the face of a defeated, fragile, transparent woman. The wrinkles seemed like maps of pain, the eyes, wells of sadness. But tonight, I looked at myself for a long time. The same wrinkles are there, perhaps even deeper, but now I see them as lines in a story of resilience. The white hair is no longer the ash of a fading life, but a hard-won crown of wisdom. My eyes, though tired, are no longer empty. They shine with purpose, with the light of hundreds of candles we have helped to relight. The woman in the mirror is no longer a victim awaiting the end. She is a warrior who found her peace not in the absence of battles, but in the choice to fight for the right causes. She is proof that it is never too late to rewrite the end of our own story. It took me a long time to recognize myself in the mirror, but tonight, finally, I see the woman I have become.